Here's a thought that should make you deeply uncomfortable. We like to think we are the best version of humanity that has ever existed. Tallest, healthiest, strongest. Every generation an upgrade on the last. The arc of history bends upward. Except the data says otherwise. In several of the wealthiest, most technologically advanced countries on Earth, humans are getting physically smaller, weaker, more fragile. And the really unsettling part? Some of what is causing it is happening right now inside your body, and you cannot feel it at all. Let's get into it. First, some historical context that nobody teaches you in school. If you could step into a time machine and walk among Upper Paleolithic Europeans, the people who were painting cave walls and hunting mammoths about 40,000 years ago, you would be struck by one thing immediately. They were enormous. Average male heights of around 174 to 179 centimeters. Dense, heavily built skeletons. Muscle attachment points on their bones that modern forensic anthropologists describe as extreme. These were not primitive weaklings. They were, by basically every measure of physical robustness, significantly more impressive than the average person alive today. And then, around 12,000 years ago, we invented farming. And everything got worse. The Neolithic Revolution, agriculture, permanent settlements, civilization's foundation, is one of the great moments in human history. It also appears to have made most people physically smaller, sicker, and weaker for several thousand years afterward. Average male height in Europe dropped from roughly 178 centimeters before farming to around 165 centimeters among early farmers. That is a collapse of over 13 centimeters. For reference, that drop was so severe that average European height did not recover to pre-agricultural levels until the 20th century. Why? Because hunter-gatherers ate an enormous variety of food. Dozens of different plants, seasonal fruits, game, fish, insects, a genuinely wide nutritional base. Early farmers ate wheat and barley and not much else. Narrow, starchy diets combined with the diseases that spread rapidly through densely packed farming settlements hammered human bodies for thousands of years. Every economic transition in history does the same thing. The agricultural revolution did it. The industrial revolution did it. And, as we will get to in a moment, the modern era is doing it too. Fast forward to the 20th century, where the story looks briefly like a success. Vaccines, sanitation, better nutrition, rising living standards. All of it combined to produce genuine height gains across the industrialized world. In a single century, people got dramatically taller, and it felt like a permanent victory. The Dutch became the tallest people on Earth. Americans were, for a long period, the tallest people in the world. But somewhere around 1980, something shifted. American men today rank 47th in global height. American women rank 58th. In a country with the largest economy in human history and a food system producing calories on an industrial scale, something is going wrong. And it is not happening to Americans alone. The Netherlands, the country that held the world record for tallest humans, has now seen measurable height decreases in people born after 1980. The generation born around that year looks like a historical peak. Everything since has been either flat or going in the wrong direction. Researchers tracking these trends point to the same cluster of causes: childhood obesity, ultra-processed food, rising inequality, reducing access to quality nutrition during the specific years when height is actually being determined. And here is the counterintuitive piece: you can be overweight and malnourished at the same time. The body stops feeling hungry long before it has received the vitamins, minerals, and protein it actually needs. That is not a paradox. That is what happens when over half your calories come from products engineered for palatability rather than nutrition. But here is where the story gets personal in a way that height statistics alone do not capture. In the mid-2010s, researchers measured the grip strength of young Americans and compared it to data from 1985. Men aged 20 to 24 were about 20 pounds weaker in the right hand than men the same age 3 decades earlier. Men aged 25 to 29 showed even larger losses. On average, young men today are roughly 22% weaker than their fathers were at the same age. Women showed similar, if slightly smaller, declines. Grip strength sounds almost trivially minor until you understand what it actually represents. It is one of the strongest physical predictors of how you will age. Strong grip correlates with longer life, better cardiovascular health, and preserved mobility in later years. Weak grip predicts earlier decline. Doctors at the Cleveland Clinic describe it as a genuine biomarker of aging. And we are watching it drop across a single generation. The explanation is pretty mundane, which somehow makes it worse. Previous generations built strength involuntarily through work. Farmers, builders, tradespeople, they did not need gyms because their daily lives provided constant physical loading. Office work provides almost none. The modern knowledge economy has quietly removed from daily life the physical demands that kept previous generation skeletons and musculature genuinely strong. Bones have their own version of this story, and it is one of the stranger findings in recent anthropology. Scientists comparing the internal bone structure of prehistoric hunter-gatherers with modern humans found that foragers from 7,000 years ago had bone density comparable to modern orangutans. Our sedentary agricultural descendants, measured a few thousand years later, had significantly lighter, more fragile bones. And modern humans? We sit at the fragile end of that spectrum. The important part: this is not genetic. One Cambridge researcher studying these specimens put it plainly. We're human, we can be as strong as an orangutan, we just aren't because we're not challenging our bones with enough loading. Sitting at a desk activates a bone-thinning process called resorption. Children who spend their critical bone-building years in front of screens are building less skeletal density than their bodies are actually capable of building. That deficit, once set, is very difficult to reverse. Now we get to the part of the story that most people have not heard. The modern environment is saturated with synthetic chemicals that actively interfere with the hormonal systems governing human growth and development. They are called endocrine disruptors, and they are everywhere. BPA, bisphenol A, is in food packaging, water bottle linings, tin can coatings, thermal paper receipts. It mimics estrogen in the body. Phthalates, used to make plastics flexible, are in food packaging, children's toys, personal care products, flooring. They suppress testosterone, disrupt thyroid hormones, and interfere with the developmental programming that determines how a child grows. Thyroid hormones are not peripheral. They are central to the entire architecture of childhood growth. Interfere with them during the sensitive early years, and the consequences are not minor. None of this requires dramatic doses. Hormones operate at concentrations of parts per billion. The endocrine system is extremely sensitive by design. That sensitivity, which is an evolutionary feature in a chemical environment that was essentially null for millions of years, becomes a liability in a world where disruptive synthetic chemicals are inescapable. Microplastics are now found in human blood, breast milk, and placental tissue. The research on their health effects is still early, but nothing in the preliminary findings looks good. There is also an intergenerational dimension that deserves attention. Epigenetics, the science of how environmental conditions alter gene expression without changing the DNA itself, has shown that what happens to one generation can be passed to the next. The Dutch hunger winter, the famine in the Netherlands at the end of World War II, produced measurable biological effects in the children of women who were pregnant during it. Those effects showed up in the grandchildren too. The mechanism involves changes to how genes are switched on and off, changes that can be inherited. What does that mean for a society that has been feeding its children on ultra-processed food for decades while surrounding them with endocrine-disrupting chemicals from conception onward? We do not fully know yet, but the direction of the question is not comforting. Here is the framing that makes sense of all of this. We are not genetically degrading. The DNA that built 179-centimeter Paleolithic hunters still exists in modern human populations. Those genes have not been selected away. They are simply not receiving the signals they need to express themselves fully. A skeleton grows dense when it is loaded. A body grows tall when it receives the right nutrition at the right time. A hormonal system functions properly when it is not being disrupted by synthetic chemicals that mimic its own signals. The human body is not broken. The human body is responding rationally to its actual environment. An environment of processed food, chemical disruption, near total physical inactivity, and nutritional gaps created by a food system that has optimized for everything except human health. Some researchers describe this as a kind of self-domestication. Domesticated animals are smaller, less robust, and physically less capable than their wild counterparts. We built civilization, reduced the daily physical demands on our bodies to almost nothing, replaced varied whole food diets with industrially manufactured products, and saturated our environment with chemicals that were never part of our evolutionary context. And now we are surprised that the bodies produced by those conditions are smaller and weaker than the bodies produced by different ones. None of this is inevitable. That is worth saying clearly. The genome has not abandoned us. Load your skeleton and it will respond. Feed yourself and your children actual food and the body will use it. Remove endocrine-disrupting chemicals from the environment and the hormonal systems they are interfering with will function as designed. The Cambridge researchers studying prehistoric bone density found that modern human skeletons are not inherently fragile. There is no anatomical reason why a person alive today could not develop bones as dense as a Paleolithic forager's, given the right conditions. The potential is still there. The question is whether we are paying enough attention to what is quietly eroding it. The numbers are measured in millimeters of height and pounds of force. They accumulate slowly. They do not trigger alarms. They do not make headlines the way acute crises do. But they add up across generations, across populations, across the full arc of what a species builds with the body it has. We are not growing. In multiple measurable senses, we are shrinking. And the causes are not mysterious. They are sitting in the food aisle, in the plastic packaging around your lunch, in the school desk where a child is spending 8 hours a day not moving. They are legible and addressable and have been documented for long enough that the question is not really, why is this happening? The question is why we are still treating it as background noise.